Ray Dalio's latest chapter of his book, which he has just released, From the Changing World Order. This is chapter 7, US-China Relations and Wars. So let's get into it. And in this video, I'm going to cover the where and how bad things already are. Number 2, the why and why things are getting so bad right now. Number 3, the when and how a Cold War becomes a hot war. And finally, number 4, the what. What should you do about it? So first, the where. Where will war take place? In his latest chapter, Ray Dalio says, sovereignty, especially as it relates to the Chinese mainland, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the East and South China Seas, is probably China's biggest issue. Now, China's claims on Taiwan and the South China Sea are not new. What is new is how quickly conflict has escalated over the last 2 months. Here's an article from Hong Kong's South China Morning Post. Risk of military conflict between US and China higher than ever. From the Economic Times, former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd warns of a potential hot war before US presidential elections in November. And from this week, China has threatened or entered into Taiwan's airspace 46 times in the past 9 days, the island's defense ministry said, as Beijing ratchets up pressure on the island it considers part of its territory. And if you haven't been hearing this news, it's because in the West, the media's been focusing at other news, while all of these are headlines from the East. And what's America's response to all of this? Here's an article from yesterday. US hitting back against Chinese military after decades of threatening actions. China in recent days has conducted large-scale military exercises and provocative jet flights near Taiwan in what China's state media says is a response to a visit to the island by senior State Department official last week. China's military fired 4 missiles into the South China Sea last week, and the PLA this week posted a video online showing a simulated Chinese bombing strike on the American territory of Guam. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says, "What we have done for decades is we have permitted the Chinese Communist Party to engage in threatening or disruptive behavior, whether that is predatory economic practices and the like, and they have continued to expand their capacity and their footprint. The biggest risk with regard to the Chinese Communist Party is appeasement." President Trump, he added, has said, "Enough, we're not going to let that happen anymore. We watch these military activities and we prepare." And China's response to the US response? Here is headlines from just 2 hours ago. China holds simultaneous military drills in 4 seas. So things are getting bad fast, which brings us on to number 2. Why is this happening now? So let's start with this map. It shows what is known as China's island chain strategy. These are 3 chains that the China sees as its lines of defense. The 3rd chain is way out in the Pacific, including Hawaii. The 2nd chain is closer to China and includes Japan and Guam. And the 1st island chain is where all the conflict is happening right now. And China calls this chain of islands its Unsinkable aircraft carrier because it includes islands throughout the South China Sea, which includes airstrips and includes Taiwan in those islands. And if you're wondering, well, which of these islands actually belong to China and which don't, that's where things get very messy. This is what's known as the 9-dash line. It's China's claim to the entire South China Sea. And it's deliberately marked in dashes to make it ambiguous exactly where China's sovereignty begins and ends. And this is not small. This is 1.3 million square miles of contested sea and islands. It has $3 trillion of trade going through it each year, including 80% of all of China's energy imports and 1/3 of all of the world's shipping. Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, and Indonesia have all officially contested China's dashes. And Taiwan sees itself as being separate from China. Actually, 4 years ago, a UN tribunal actually agreed with them and ruled against China. But China simply said, we don't recognize the tribunal. And China has gone ahead and taken islands and even reefs in the South China Sea and converted them fully into islands operating with airstrips and military bases. 2 years ago, the New York Times reported China's sea control is a done deal, short of war with the United States. So why is this coming to a head right now? Mainly because the US is pushing harder and China is pushing back. In July this year, Mike Pompeo made an official US statement saying, "We are making clear Beijing's claims to offshore resources across most of the South China Seas are completely unlawful, as is this campaign of bullying to control them. The PRC has no legal grounds to unilaterally impose its will on the region. Beijing has offered no coherent legal basis for its 9-dash line claims in the South China Sea." And the day after that statement, the US sent 2 aircraft carriers to the South China Sea. And since then, the US has been conducting military drills and freedom of navigation exercises, including sending US destroyers through the Taiwan Strait between Taiwan and China. And then in the last 2 months, the US has staged 2 high-profile official visits to Taiwan. And the latest visit this week was Keith Cratch, US Undersecretary of State, who went to pay tribute to former Taiwan President Lee, who died in July. As this article reports, Yanan He, an associate professor at the Department of International Relations at Lehigh University, said that Li had been the first Taiwan leader to float the idea of the island being a separate, distinct entity from mainland China. That makes him number 1 or number 2 most hated person on Beijing's list for Taiwan. So by paying tribute to this person, the Trump administration is really poking Beijing in the eye. China's military defense said of the trip, whether the purpose of the liaison is to use Taiwan to control China or for Taiwan to rise based on foreign power, it is doomed to be a dead end. Those who play with fire will burn themselves. The US has piled even more pressure on this month by actually sanctioning companies that were part of building the military islands that China has in the South China Sea. And on top of that, Taiwan is now test firing its own missiles as a show of strength. And believe me, all of these actions to antagonize China are working, as well as China heightening its military activity, running a record number of military drills, and its fighting words. We've also now got the country for the first time starting to show off new military weaponry. Highway to the danger zone. China taunts US with carrier killer missile test. China's H-20 stealth bomber doubling Beijing's strike range. And US caught videos showing China bombing US Air Force Base attempts to coerce, intimidate. And close calls are getting even closer. Beijing claims it has warned a US destroyer in South China Sea after missile launch. And if you're still thinking, yeah, this is all talk, I mean, it doesn't mean they're actually going to invade Taiwan. Here's leaked images from earlier this year of the Chinese military in a room, which is called the Southern Island Landing Battle Group Command Post. You can see a 3D model of Taiwan in the middle of the room and maps on the wall showing invasion routes for China landing and then taking over Taiwan. And China isn't making any secret about this. President Xi has said Taiwan's unification with China is inevitable and went on to say recently, we make no promise to renounce the use of force and reserve the option of taking all necessary means. Which brings us on to part 3. When is this going to happen? There is a possibility that there's going to be conflict even before the US elections in November. US could attack China, seize disputed islands in South China Sea before 2020 US elections, military experts. The constant provocation and threats by the US is pushing the region in chaos, and it is quite likely that the US could further provoke Beijing by attacking Chinese-controlled islands and reefs. But there is a difference between a conflict and a full-out war, and what Ray Dalio says is he believes, based on these graphs, that we're looking at somewhere in the region of about 5 years. That's because he believes that China is waiting patiently until it grows stronger than the US, both militarily as well as economically and technologically. All this will happen over the next 5 years, which is why he has set that time frame at which point there will be what he calls a decoupling. But that timeline does miss the fact that China already has surpassed the US in strength in many of these different areas, as I explained in this video. And in terms of sea power, China's already got a navy which is almost double the size in terms of number of ships that America has. And while all of China's ships are close at hand, all of America's navy is spread around the world. But the biggest factor to the timing of both conflict and war isn't even just what China would like that timing to be, as much as what America's doing to accelerate that process. And right now, America is accelerating the process like crazy. Ray Dalio sees this too, as well as the danger of it, as he says, I would worry a lot if we were to see an emerging fight over sovereignty, especially if we were to see a fourth Taiwan Straits crisis. It would signal the decline of the American empire in the Pacific and beyond in much the same way as the British loss of the Suez Canal signaled the end of the British Empire and beyond. The implications of that would extend well beyond that loss. For example, in the British case, it signaled the end of the British pound as a reserve currency. The more of a show the US makes of defending Taiwan, the greater the humiliation of a lost war or a retreat would be. And you know, when I started this YouTube channel to bring future predictions to entrepreneurs and to leaders around the world, the last thing I thought I'd be doing is be predicting a coming war. But this really does affect all of us, which brings us on to the fourth part, which is what can we do about it? Clearly, none of us can stop a war if governments decide they want to start one. But what we can do is stay aware, safe, and ready. Ask yourself, if there is a conflict, am I safe and am I ready? Am I safe physically and financially? And if the answer is no, make the changes now. Way back in 1914, Russian government minister Petro Durnovo wrote the Durnovo Memorandum. He warned the Russian Tsar Nicholas II that there was a war coming in Europe. He warned that if the monarchy didn't prepare for war, then there's every chance Russia itself would get sucked into the war, there'd be economic crisis, and the monarchy would end up being overthrown. Nicholas II got the memorandum, but either didn't read it or didn't take action. Either way, 6 months later, there was a war. It was World War I. Durnovo died, his memorandum having been ignored, and it was finally found in paperwork many years later, long after Nicholas II and his family had been overthrown, assassinated, and shot by the Bolsheviks. While I hope that none of us have as dramatic an ending as that, the reality is that the future always leaves clues in the present. So keep seeing the news, be on the news, and stay tuned. And if you haven't yet, do subscribe because I'm going to keep on giving updates every week. We are in for an unprecedented 5 or 10 years ahead, and it's more important than ever as we get into uncharted territory that we stay connected and that we stay informed. Thanks for watching, and if you've liked this video, please give it a like, leave a comment down below. I'll make sure I get to as many of them as possible. And do go watch the videos that you might have missed from earlier. I'll see you again next week.